This is the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. Here's Robert Kiyosaki.
Hello and welcome to Rich Dad World. Thank you so much for being part of this program, for listening, for watching. You know, as we always say, there's nothing more important than your financial education, especially at this time in this place in history. And with the world changing so rapidly, all in almost every country, we really want to bring you the best experts, the people that know what's going on economically, financially, globally, so that you can best position yourself for what's coming down the road. So that's exactly what we've got today. We have a very, very special guest, Mr. Peter Schiff, economist. I'll tell you one thing about Peter. You will know exactly where Peter stands because he does not hold back. He will tell it exactly as he sees it. And he has a huge big picture historically as well as currently. So this is going to be a fantastic, very, very jam-packed show. Lots and lots of information. It's one you're going to want to watch more than once because I can tell you Peter and Robert are going to have a fabulous discussion. I'm going to be sitting here more just listening and learning. So with that, Robert, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, I'm glad Peter is on the show because Peter's been a friend for years and years. But the reason this is an important show is because the world changed on August 15th, 1971. So when I look at the world and say, why is it screwed up? Why is there such a gap between the rich and the poor? Why is real estate in a bubble? You can trace much of it back to 50 years ago, August 15th, 1971. And in January of 1972, I was on an aircraft carrier in the South China Sea because I missed the announcement that what Nixon did in August 15th. And it changed my life because I'm on this aircraft carrier as a Marine pilot, and I get this letter from Rich Dad via snail mail saying that, hey, Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. Well, it took me 6 months to get that letter. But anyway, with that, I didn't know what it meant. Back in 1971, for those who may not know it, it was illegal for Americans to own gold because in 1933, FDR took the dollar off the gold standard. He also caused Social Security. FDR really screwed this economy up way back then. So I couldn't own gold. We didn't know what gold was. And that really changed my life. So when I look at what is going on in the economy today, I mean, let me ask this question. How in the world can the CEO of a company borrow money just to jack the price of their stocks up? That's criminal. And why is real estate prices so high? So the reason we invited Peter today is because Peter, as Kim says, is one of the most outspoken. He does not give a shit what you think of him. He will tell you. He hates Bitcoin. he will not stop. So I'm going to back off right now because Peter is the CEO of Euro Pacific Capital and Gold. And I invest with Peter for full disclosure because some of his guys on his team at Euro Pacific Capital and Schiff Gold and all the companies he has, they are professionals in the world of gold, which President Nixon took off the gold standard 50 years ago. So it's a very important show. And if you want to know why the rich are getting richer, the poor middle class are getting poorer, our money is fake. That's what's wrong. And anybody saving dollars is a loser right now, and because they keep printing it. So with that, Peter, give us your opinion of August 15th, 1971. What happened on that day?
So on August 15th, 1971, that is when Nixon closed the gold window. Of course, when he closed it, he said it was just temporary, but it's been 50 years and it hasn't reopened. But what you spoke about FDR in 1933 is true because that's the year when the government made it illegal for Americans to own monetary gold. So American citizens could not take their Federal Reserve notes back to the Federal Reserve and get real dollars, which were made of gold. All they could do was negotiate, circulate the Federal Reserve notes.
Robert Kiyosaki is the best-selling author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, a 10 Roberts free virtual wealth building event. Claim your free access now at richdadfree.com. Go to richdadfree.com.
But if you were not American, if you lived outside the United States, you were still able to take your Federal Reserve notes to the Federal Reserve and actually get paid the gold that the notes promised to pay. And so that continued up until 1971. And basically what was happening in the late 1960s, early 1970s, was we started to run very big deficits in the 1960s to pay for the war in Vietnam, to pay to go to the moon, to pay for the war on poverty, and all sorts of government programs. They called it guns and butter, and we had both, yet we didn't pay for either. And so we ran these big deficits, and the Federal Reserve was then monetizing the deficits. Now we call it QE. They hadn't thought of that word back then, but that's what they were doing. So the Fed was doing QE to monetize all this government spending. We didn't have the gold, and our foreign creditors were suspicious that we didn't have enough gold to meet our obligations. So they started to show up at the gold window with their Federal Reserve notes asking for the gold. Well, we didn't have enough. And so we ended up defaulting on our obligations, because really Federal Reserve notes were promises to pay gold, and we defaulted on that promise. And so anybody who says the U.S. government has never defaulted on an obligation, that's not true. That was a massive default in 1971. And, we've been on this fiat-based monetary system ever since. And I think this system is now on the verge of an implosion. And I think we're going to see this, relatively soon, where the dollar now collapses and the world returns to the gold standard just without the dollar. Because when the world was on a dollar standard after Bretton Woods, it was because the dollar was not only backed by gold, but redeemable on demand into gold. And after we defaulted, the dollar, lost a lot of value in the 1970s, about 2/3 of its value relative to the Deutsche Mark, the yen, the Swiss franc. But it continued to serve as the reserve, and it's a reserve currency to this day. I think that status is what's in jeopardy.
How old were you when were you even born yet?
Yes, I was born in 1963, so I was 8.
So I don't think you were watching Bonanza, were you, when Nixon made the announcement?
No, I think I saw Bonanza in reruns.
Okay, so this is my question then. This is a commercial plug for Peter Schiff, because, and full disclosure, I do invest with him, because your guys are very knowledgeable on gold. So what does Schiff Gold do? What do you guys do? I mean, and if you're only a kid, why are you so adamant about gold? I mean, something got into you.
Well, gold is real money. And, my father taught me about gold a long time ago. In fact, before we went off the gold standard, my father was one of the few people who actually testified in front of the Senate Committee on Money and Banking against going off the gold standard. And my father was the only one that said that if we went off the gold standard, the price of gold would go up, and that the value of the dollar would go down, and that we'd have lots of inflation. All of the other government witnesses, including the then Secretary of the Treasury and the then head of the Federal Reserve, they all said that if we went off the gold standard, the price of gold, which was about $35 an ounce at the time, they said the price of gold would fall. They thought the dollar was supporting gold instead of the other way around. So they were talking about how great the economy was going to be if we can only remove the shackles of the gold standard. And my father was the only one who testified and got it right, because he laid out exactly what was going to happen in the 1970s. And it happened exactly the way he said, and the exact opposite of what the Secretary of the Treasury and the Federal Reserve said. And you know what? The Secretary of the Treasury and the Federal Reserve head are just as incompetent now, maybe even more so than they were back then. They have no idea the damage that they have unleashed from their policies, especially the mistakes that they've made since COVID. I mean, the Federal Reserve has done everything wrong since COVID. And despite the fact that everybody is praising them for what they did, remember, everybody praised them for all the bailouts and all the stimulus following 2008. And they praised them when they bailed everything out after the dot-com bubble popped. But all those were policy mistakes. What the Federal Reserve should have done following the outbreak of COVID was withdraw money from circulation, allow interest rates to go up. Because the problem with COVID, and I said this at the time, was a supply problem. People were leaving their jobs. Companies were shutting down. People were staying home. They weren't working. They weren't producing goods. They weren't providing services. So we had a lot less stuff to buy. What the Federal Reserve needed to do was reduce the money supply so that money supply went down with goods supply. Instead, they did the opposite. They flooded the economy with money. They printed all this money and sent it out to everybody. So what happened? We increased demand while we were decreasing supply. That's why you're seeing this huge increase in consumer prices right now.
Peter, I can't believe this. I mean, you're such an economist right now. I just gave you, I know Peter is a really, really dear friend. I met him on the real estate guys cruise, and they put us on stage, and we have a yelling match with each other. But the trouble is, we both agree. We're still yelling at each other.
You said earlier that you think that there's going to be a return to the gold standard. What would that look like?
This episode is brought to you by 8 Sleep. Good sleep is the ultimate game changer and nature's best medicine. Consistent good sleep can help reduce the likelihood of serious health issues, decrease the risk of heart disease, lower blood pressure, and even reduce the risk of Alzheimer's. Yet, still more than 30% of Americans struggle with sleep, and temperature is one of the main causes of poor sleep. In Arizona, where I live, it can get hot. However, now I'm falling asleep in record time, faster than I have before, all thanks to my 8 Sleep Pod Pro cover. The Pod Pro cover by 8 Sleep is the most advanced solution on the market for thermal regulation. It pairs dynamic cooling and heating with biometric tracking. You can add the cover to any mattress and start sleeping as cool as 55 degrees or as hot as 110. The temperature of the cover will adjust each side of the bed based on your sleep stages, biometrics, and bedroom temperature, reacting intelligently to create optimal sleeping environment. The result? 8 Sleep users fall asleep up to 32% faster, reduce sleep interruptions by 40%, and get overall more restful sleep. The Pod Pro cover by 8 Sleep is so popular, it has garnered attention from CEOs, high performers such as Olympic gold medalist Red Gerard, and top CrossFit athletes, including 2021 fitness man on earth Justin Medeiros. They're all powered by 8 Sleep to make the most of their workouts and recovery, because good sleep is the ultimate game changer. Go to 8sleep.com/richdad to check out the Pod Pro cover and save $150 off Pod Pro and Pod Pro cover at checkout. 8 Sleep ships to the USA, Canada, and the UK.
Well, it would look pretty bad for America, because a return to the gold standard would mean a rejection of the dollar standard. And so if the dollar was no longer desired as the reserve, the value of the dollar on international exchanges would collapse, because we have these record trade deficits. I mean, the last trade deficit we had, all-time record high, we're running trade deficits of about $1.2 trillion a year. It is enormous. But the only reason we could do this is because the world will take dollars for their stuff. But if they go back to a gold standard, they ain't going to take dollars for their stuff. We're going to have to give them gold, which we don't have, or we're going to have to produce stuff, which we can't, because we don't have the factories. We don't have the infrastructure, the labor force, the supply chains. So the dollar is going to collapse. And what's going to happen is all of these products that Americans take for granted are on the shelves when they want to buy something. They're all going to be gone, because we're not going to be able to afford them. I mean, they're going to be too expensive for Americans to buy. So the entire American standard of living is going to collapse. Now, it's not going to make that big a difference for a lot of the other countries outside the US, because they don't issue reserve currencies. So, if you're living in New Zealand, for example, the New Zealand dollar isn't a reserve currency. So if you want to import something, you've got to export something. And so people in New Zealand have to earn dollars. We don't have to earn dollars. We just print them. Well, now the people in New Zealand will start earning gold instead of dollars. But the change for America is huge, because we used to be able to print dollars. We can't print gold. We have to earn gold just like everybody else. And that's a game changer for Americans. But it's also a game changer for people who have savings, people who, are hoping to retire. If you think you're going to retire on a bunch of dollars, you got another thing coming. It's the dollars that are going to retire, not you. You're going to keep on working unless you take action now to divest yourself of US dollars and dollar denominated assets and buy some real things, foreign stocks, property, gold and silver. You got to get out of paper and into actual things that have real value and that can generate real income.
So let me get under Peter's skin right now, because this is where they announced that the US will come out with a Fed coin in 2024. Now, that could be a rumor, as generally is. It's just forward guidance by the Fed. Bullshit, in other words. Would that solve the problem?
No, that's just going to make the problem worse. That's just going to make it easier for the Federal Reserve to create inflation, because instead of creating paper currency, they just create digital currency. And you have all these lunatics in Washington. They want to use a Fed coin as a way for the Federal Reserve to put money right into the pockets of American citizens. See, they're tired of quantitative easing for Wall Street, where the Federal Reserve prints money so that Wall Street bankers can get rich. They want the Fed to print money so that everybody on Main Street can get rich. But the problem is nobody gets rich by printing money. You're just creating inflation.
If there's a crash in that stock market, what's going to happen to the baby boomers? That's the big question. Because
the baby boomers, what they have to worry about is not just the crash of the stock market, because that could happen. But what's going to be worse is if the stock market doesn't crash, because the only thing that's going to prevent the stock market from crashing is the dollar crashing instead. And that's even worse if you're planning on retiring. So I think the baby boom is probably screwed either way, unless they act now and completely change their investment portfolios to be prepared for both a stock market crash or a dollar crash. They have to be prepared for either one. But the dollar crash is actually worse.
So how will a dollar crash look different than a stock market crash, Peter?
Well, in the dollar crash, the stock market goes up, but it doesn't matter that it went up, because the value goes down anyway. I mean, go take a look at a chart of the Zimbabwe stock market. That market never crashed. It went straight up. The problem is it didn't go up as much as the Zimbabwe dollar went down. So, you could see the stock market going up. But if everything at the supermarket is going up 2 or 3 times as fast, you're not getting richer, right? You're getting poorer, even though you have a higher net worth in dollars. Look, there are lots of billionaires in Zimbabwe. There are trillionaires in Zimbabwe. Who cares? I mean, you're a trillionaire, but you're broke, right? Because the money isn't worth anything. So if you think you're going to retire because you got $5 million, $10 million, you don't know. What if $10 million is what it costs to buy a cup of coffee? You can't retire on one coffee cup.
So if you have a house loan or rental property loans, mortgages, and the dollar crashes, you're going to be paying them off with like pennies.
Yes, the worst thing you can be in inflation is a creditor. So you want to be a debtor. In deflation, it's good to be a creditor because the value of the money goes up. And if the borrower defaults, you get their assets, right? So if you borrow money to buy a piece of property and everything crashes and you can't pay the loan back, the lender takes the property. He's got the collateral, so he's got something. But if the dollar crashes, the lender's got nothing. He's got worthless money, and you've got a piece of property that you basically got for nothing because you don't really have to pay back the money that you borrowed, because you borrowed money that had real value and you paid back money with next to no value. But the problem for a lot of people who end up owning their home free and clear is what if something goes wrong? I mean, the maintenance costs are going to go through the roof. The cost of materials, the cost of insurance, and then your electric bill, all your utilities. Things are going to skyrocket in price. So, you may not have to pay your mortgage, but your electric bill may be a lot higher than what your mortgage used to be.
That's a good point. Really good point.
Peter, I love you dearly. We argue all the time. You're fantastic. You're a source. You have a lot of guts. I'm a public commend you. You take on issues on your podcast I wouldn't dare take on. Peter and I share the same idea that in 71, the dollar went nuts. And to anybody who's saving money right now is crazy. So please listen to the Peter Schiff Show.
And let me just ask a final comment, Peter. So what are the opportunities you see for the average person? What should they be doing today?
Well, I think they should be doing, what I'm doing, what you, Robert, are doing. And that is, don't save dollars, because you're just a sucker if you do that. So save real money, buy gold and silver, and accumulate assets, real assets outside the United States that pay good dividends, and that during an inflationary time period, see, you want to own companies that can immediately pass on their higher costs to their consumers by raising their prices. So you want to have businesses where the customer is going to pay the higher price, because there are some businesses where, if you raise your price, you're going to lose your customers. Or, there's a hierarchy of needs, and there are certain things that people need, and they're going to buy the things they need before the things they want. And if the things they need get really expensive, well, they have to give up some of the things that they want. So I want to own the companies that are selling the stuff that people need, because that's where you have the most success at raising prices and still maintaining, your customers. So you need these inflation hedges. You got to get out of the dollar. You got to understand the enormity of the change that is about to take place, and the profound impact it's going to have on the standard of living in the United States. But the worst part about it is, though, the political climate for this crisis could not be worse, because capitalism has never been less popular and socialism has never been more glorified. And I think a lot of people are going to look at this financial, apocalypse, really, that we're going to have, and they're just going to blame it on capitalism. They're going to blame it on the rich. They're going to blame it on the bankers. And they're going to say the solution is that we just have government do everything. Government needs to take control. Government needs to run all the businesses. Government needs to provide the jobs and all this. And so it's very, very dangerous, not only to be an investor, but to be an American. So, people should have a plan B or a plan C, just in case. But at a minimum, protect your wealth.
So that's why I listen to Peter Schiff and the Peter Schiff Show.
So
all right, Peter, thank you very much.
Robert. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.